Cell phone in hand, Lucas got up from his desk and went to the minibar. Furious one of the maids hadn't had the sense to stock the blasted thing before leaving for the night, he balled his free hand and slammed it down on the bar's marble surface. Marcus Grayson was one of the best private investigators in the country. Yet the man couldn't answer a simple question regarding Lucas's father's new executive assistant. Lucas was certain his father had done everything humanly possible to cover his tracks, but he found it difficult to believe the man hadn't left behind as much as an incriminating fingerprint. This mystery was infuriating him. It wasn't the idea that his father was trying to sabotage him that was so maddening, but the fact that, for the life of him, he couldn't seem to place his next move. Grayson's theory was that Raphael's so-called assistant was someone Lucas was close to. The idea was plausible. But Lucas, exhausted from another long night, was sick of speculating. He brought the phone against his mouth and raised his voice. How hard could it be to track a man who's probably standing within a mile of here? I'm doing the best I can, sir. I don't exactly have a lot to work with. What about the vehicle Fordman saw leaving my father's office complex? We've been trying to locate it, but it's not as if there's a shortage of red Hondas in Westchester. Lucas tensed. He heard footsteps in the hall and took the phone from his ear. Miranda, are you down here? It was the sound of a soft voice, a woman's voice, one Lucas didn't recognize. I'm not paying you to make excuses. Find him. He hung up the phone. Which member of his staff sounded so warm and feminine? Lucas came into the hall, his mind straining for a possibility. He heard footsteps and turned around. At the end of the corridor, standing in front of his mother's demi-lune console table, was the most strikingly beautiful woman he'd seen in a long time. The young woman was wearing a charcoal gray business suit, which accented long, lean arms and a tight, slender waist. Sheer white fabric was loosely fitted over the swell of two perfect round breasts. The top button of her blouse had been left open, giving him a generous viewing of her creamy neckline. Her hourglass figure was outlined perfectly by her clothing, making it, much to his fascination, easy to examine her shapely torso, hips, and legs. He watched as his vision peered around the corner. She stopped as he caught her eye, trembled, turned to face him. With a clearer view, Lucas couldn't help studying her more closely. The freckles that dusted her face were endearing. They set her apart from the crowd. Rich brown hair flowed like silk over her shoulders and poured down her back in waves. She had emerald eyes, brighter than the 5 acres of green that surrounded his mansion. He thought, though he knew it was impossible, that it was Lena standing before him. But it couldn't be. Lena would never come back there, and if for some odd reason she had, her husband, Alec Westwood, would be right beside her, ready to beat the life out of him. Could it be that in his loneliness it had driven him to hallucinate? Aside from her curls, the girl standing in front of him looked exactly like the woman he'd asked to be his wife. No, it wasn't Lena, but this girl was easily as attractive, maybe more so. He came toward her, glad she hadn't spoken first. It gave him the opportunity to make his introduction the way he wanted to do it. I don't believe we've had the pleasure. He smiled as he approached her. I think I would remember. We haven't. Her chest rose and fell as she breathed. Lucas. Curious, Lucas raised his brows. You seem to know me, but I don't know who you are. The girl turned to leave, but he caught her hand and held it in his. Her skin was so soft, so smooth. He couldn't help brushing his thumb across its surface. She looked up at him, and he smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. Lucas let his mouth linger against her skin. He'd always had a weakness for the scent of roses. This woman smelled as if she'd taken a bath in them. What's your name? She ignored him, seemed intent on avoiding the question. Her eyes were fixed on the window behind him, and they shifted only when he gave her hand a squeeze. As though she could hear his every last twisted thought, she glared at him and tugged her hand free. I should think you'd know exactly who I am, considering how much time you spent trying to ruin my sister's life. Lila? That's right. She clearly wanted to leave, but her gaze lingered. You're not at all what I pictured. Lucas was dumbstruck. He'd always believed Lena's parents were the ones he needed to keep his eye on, but apparently her younger sister was the one who wore the pants in the family. Based on the way she'd introduced herself, he imagined there wasn't much that frightened Lila Benson. He was intrigued by her boldness and wondered how two sisters raised under the same roof could be so different. What did you envision? She didn't answer. Someone older? He offered. Lila gave him a once-over, scanning him from the hair on his head to the soles of his Versace crocodile shoes. When she was finished, she brought her eyes to his, looking at him as though he was no better than an insect. On second thought, I think you're exactly what I pictured. That's funny, Lucas said, because I never would have imagined that Lena's younger sister could be even more attractive than she is. You're absolutely breathtaking. Lila's eyes went wide. She attempted to draw a breath unsuccessfully, eyes shifting as though they didn't know where to go. She seemed to be doing all she could not to react to his compliment. But Lucas had been playing this game a long time. He would bet money that there was a good 10 years between them. Lila's thorny exterior wouldn't help her. Neither would her sarcasm. Is that how you tricked Lena into agreeing to marry you? Told her how irresistible you thought she was? Her stare was as cold as ice. If you honestly think your sister could be that naive, you must not think as much of her as I do, he said. The young woman's eyes blazed. I think the world of my sister. In our family, we look out for one another. Now Lucas was intrigued. Unlike in mine? She raked her fingers through her brunette waves. You seem to know a lot about me, he said, moving closer. Is that why you're here? You came to see if your sister's story is true? She turned away. Some say I'm no better than the devil. I'm sure you've given them a few good reasons. Do you really believe that? Or is the journalist in you looking for proof? How do you know I'm a journalist? She shot him a look. Lucas smiled. I keep up. Am I supposed to be afraid because you know what I do for a living? I may be young, but I've had my share of exposure. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not afraid to tell you exactly what I think of you either. He nodded, walking a few paces. I'm impressed by your bravery. There aren't a lot of people who'd have the guts to come here and tell me off in my own home. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about me. I'm not sure you want to hear how I feel, Lila said. The brightest reporter at the New York Times doesn't want to take her chance at castigating me? Perhaps I should start you off. I am very familiar with the topic at hand. I am the arrogant, silver spoon-fed rich boy whose father taught him to regard everyone in his path as an adversary. I show my enemies no mercy, just attack them at will and flail them until they're lying in a pool of their own blood. Your words, not mine. Actually, they're Lena's. Guess you missed chapter 17 of Hell Hath No Fury. That's when Darius learns the woman he loves has fallen in love with someone else. He vows to get revenge no matter what the cost, even if it means killing the man who stands in his way. It isn't too hard to imagine where she got her inspiration, Lila said. From what I understand, that's exactly the way the story went. Darius. So they call me. But you don't strike me as being the sort of woman who takes the word of others without checking out matters for herself. Gesturing for Lila to follow him, Lucas led the way to the study, where he conducted the majority of his business dealings. He strode to where his laptop computer was and pulled back his chair. Fortunately, there was nothing incriminating about him on his desktop. Once Lila saw this for herself, her defenses were sure to soften. Have a seat, he said, unless you're afraid of what you might find. I'm not afraid of anything, but I'm betting if you want me to look at your computer, it'll be pretty tough to find something on it that implicates you. He was surprised she'd come to this conclusion, but he'd hoped she'd decide to have a look anyway. Surely it wouldn't be too difficult for a top-notch investigative reporter. I should think if there's anything here worthy of the front page, you of all people will be able to find it. I don't enjoy being baited. Lucas grinned. What do you enjoy? Lila's green irises broadened. Bringing the truth to light, making sure people know what sorts of unscrupulous activities are taking place around them, seeing to it that those who take advantage of others are made to pay for what they do. Ignoring her directness, Lucas shortened the distance between them. Lila shook a little but didn't move away. She looked at him, and he knew he had succeeded in gaining her full attention. I admire your virtuous stance, but I'm not the villain you think I am. Where's the evidence? You can see for yourself. Lena took a look at this laptop too before she and I parted ways. I run a legitimate jewelry company which sells diamonds at market value to high-level merchants. With clear reluctance, Lila took a seat in his desk chair. She opened several of the files, bringing up spreadsheets, price charts, and sales records. There's no way to tell from a price chart that these sales are on the up and up. Just because you're selling the diamonds for what they appear to be worth, it doesn't mean they aren't going to the wrong people. I beg to differ. A true criminal genius would take the extra $1, unless he knew doing so would blow his cover. Maybe. Lucas draped his arm across the back of the chair. But you won't find proof of that because it isn't the case. Abruptly, Lila inched forward and stood. It apparently made her very uncomfortable for the two of them to be in such close proximity. Lucas wondered whether to take that as an insult or a compliment. He continued, I employ 200,000 people around the world, many of whom have husbands and wives who depend on the salaries I provide them. Lucas averted his eyes. This was the half-truth, but still a lie. There are a lot of men in this world who only care about the bottom line. I founded my company because I want to employ a few of those less fortunate souls who have been left behind. If I've cheated the system along the way, it's only because, from where I'm standing, the ends justifies the means. Why should I believe you? Lila asked. You have no reason to. As far as the world is concerned, I am Darius Bryant. But I think if you believed I was the monster everyone says, you would have left already. Maybe I'm only playing with you. Maybe, Lucas grinned. I'm definitely a complicated subject matter. I'd say it's going to take more than one meeting to fully comprehend me. If I were you, I'd plan on sticking around a few days. It's going to take at least that long to uncover all of my deep, dark secrets. That's not a bad idea. Maybe you're onto something. Really? You want to stay at the mansion? A hot shiver crept up Lucas's spine. I have to say I'm a little surprised. I wouldn't have imagined Lena's younger sister would set foot in my home, let alone agree to pack an overnight bag. Lila's ivory cheeks grew crimson. I guess you don't know me as well as you thought. Lucas sat on the leather couch that faced his fireplace. He extended his hand toward the seat beside him. Other than your name and occupation, I know very little about you, but I would like to get to know you very much. There isn't much to tell, Lila said. I highly doubt that. Really, I'm not all that interesting. That's where you couldn't be more wrong, Lucas said, wondering why she was so hesitant to talk about herself. Journalists live for the next byline. Lila was young, but she'd made quite a name for herself at the New York Times. I, for one, find you fascinating, and since I'm willing to disclose my innermost secrets, I should think the least you could do is return the favor. You can trust me. I'd never betray your confidence. He got up, came beside her. God, she was gorgeous. A tall, perfect figure, delicate cheekbones, and luscious lips. He rested his palm against her shoulder. Her soft locks tickled the surface of his hand. It was a perfect moment, and Lila was making no effort to move away. Lucas leaned in, thinking, I'm the luckiest man on earth. For a second he could swear his smile was being returned, but the sound of his father's footsteps drew him from his sweet thoughts. The young woman slid from beneath his grasp so suddenly, as if she believed she'd done something wrong. She took a step backward as his father approached them. Ah, Lucas, Raphael said, I see you've met our guest. Guest, Lucas repeated, his insides clenched as a catastrophic realization came crashing down around him like a ton of concrete. Meet Miss Lila Benson, Raphael said, my new executive assistant.